You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The views expressed by the individuals during this broadcast are their own opinions, and they may not be the same as those of their group or other organizations they may be involved with.
All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to V.A.C. Roundtable number 53, Interstate Commerce with Adam Smith. Adam is back joining us again. He was with us on for our V.A.C. Roundtable number 30. It was a wee bit ago, so we're back again checking in with him. We thank Adam for joining us today, and it seems it's been a kind of a crazy day for the man, so don't forget to take a few deep breaths of oxygen. It's good for all of us. All right, so now that we're here and we're ready to go, for people who are new, who are watching this for the first time and don't know who Adam Smith is, what is your history in cannabis, Adam? And I know it's but some people know who you are, some people don't. Some people saw your last conversation with us, some haven't. So
of course,
go vanilla.
So I come to this from the movement side. I got involved in cannabis policy and drug policy reform back in the early '90s on DRCnet, which was the first internet discussion list for drug policy anywhere. And over time, that list, the web happened, and that list became multiple websites and an actual organization. And I finished grad school and ran down to Washington, D.C. to go end a $4 trillion a year global drug trade from a $30,000 a year job. Trying to end the drug war. And we did a lot of stuff and started the first regular publication covering the drug war with original coverage from the reform perspective, and helped launch an organization called Students for Sensible Drug Policy. And years and years later, found myself in Oregon, while the dispensaries and then adult use passed. And I saw what was starting to happen here to a generations old production industry in parts of the state that had depended upon the cannabis economy for a long time. After we legalized, we tried to bring the industry we had into the legal industry by making licenses here cheap and unlimited. But it turned out that the industry we had here was an export industry and always had been. And so in trying to help organize the locally owned craft industry, I had started something called the Craft Cannabis Alliance. But it became pretty quickly apparent after a year and a half or so that until we opened up access to the markets that we had traditionally served from places like Northern California and Southern Oregon, we were just going to wipe out a lot of farmers. While we watched, huge corporations spend $50 million at a pop to build giant facilities to grow, biomass indoors where it was never meant to be. And so being named Adam Smith, I looked at those economics and thought, well, that's, not the way this works at all. And so we wrote and passed a law in Oregon in 2019 that allows the state to enter into regulatory frameworks to regulate commerce between legal markets. That was followed by California, which took a couple extra years because of COVID. Their bill finally got introduced in 22 and passed, and Washington State just passed their interstate law. So the entire West Coast now has interstate commerce laws. And I will give you a couple of more quick things. I know I switched in from, I will stop because I switched in from my history to the whole thing, and I'm going to let you talk for a while. Sorry.
Well, it's not going to be as much as, we've assembled questions for you that our council members want to ask, because as we're getting our head on, wrapped around the concept. Other people are just learning about it. So we want to kind of take an approach of understanding for them, because you did just download a lot, and I get it, but some people are looking at you like a dog that's just showed a card trick. So we'll continue on. The next will be Council Member Brian Buckley. He has a question for you.
Thank you. Hi, Adam. How are you today?
I am well. Hello, Brian. Pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure is all mine. So why did you choose to focus on interstate commerce specifically?
Because it became very obvious to me when we legalized in Oregon, we did something I think very wise and very Oregonian. We made licenses cheap and unlimited because we understood that the cannabis economy had been very important for quite a long time in a lot of parts of the state that didn't have a lot of other economic drivers. And so watching so many people who had been in the medical industry, growing medically for 20 years here, registered medical, or coming in from the unregulated market, put everything on the line, invest everything to create, build, small farms. I mean, everything here is an acre or under, right? And then watch suddenly when, the inevitable glut happened, right? We have 4 million people here, a lot of whom grow their own weed or get it from their friends. And, we have always had an industry here. Most of the cannabis has always left. And suddenly all that cannabis had to stay here. And everyone started talking about, we have an oversupply problem. Well, to me, it was obvious that what we really had was a market access problem. If we could access the markets that this region has traditionally served, we would need every ounce of cannabis we were growing under current licensure, and we would actually need to expand. Instead, we were watching hundreds of small farms, many of which were at people's personal homes and farms, that they put up everything and friends and family's money to grow and security, and watch prices go from $1,800 a pound to $300 a pound in 15 months. And now everyone's going out of business. And every politician in the state, every legislator is talking about, oh, we have an oversupply problem. But when you posit it, when you think about it as an oversupply problem, the answers you come to all hurt producers, all hurt farmers. How do we have fewer of those people? How do we make them grow less, right? When you understand that it's a market access problem, when you understand that this region, the Pacific Northwest in particular, is not the only region in the country, but probably the most important production region in the country, certainly the most important production region in the country. And you understand that the future of this is, if we are lucky, is for these small farmers to survive and serve markets all over the country and ultimately all over the world. Then the answers you come to are somewhat different. It's not, how do we wipe these people out faster so we can get to a stable price for the 12 that are left? It is, how do we open the markets and create a functioning cannabis economy? The more I looked at this, the more I realized that on the other side of the supply chain, everybody said, oh, well, why would these other states want to do this? Well, when federal legalization happens, all the state silos will go away. The Commerce Clause of the Constitution does not have a cannabis exception, and it is there to keep states from having trade wars. And while Idaho can still put you in prison for 100 years for a joint if they want, if New Jersey has a legal market, they will not be allowed to discriminate against California or Oregon cannabis, right? That's how this works. And so we are now, on the other side, we are incentivizing, very capital intensive production in places where the minute federal legalization happens, it's going to get wiped out by competition. It will never be competitive to grow cannabis at industrial scale in Minnesota. It's just not going to be. Craft, local, small, yes, but to grow all your biomass indoors under lights in Minnesota, the minute those doors open, that's all going to get wiped out. And in the meantime, the parts of the industry in those states, like I grew up in New York, the parts of the industry in those states that belong in those states, that are sustainable there, right? Retail, distribution, delivery, product development, small manufacturing, wellness, hospitality, they've all existed there. The weed comes from somewhere else, always has. And by opening the gates to thousands of the most competitive and best suppliers, all of that part of the industry can get off the ground instead of waiting for GTI to grow 500,000 square feet in a warehouse in Albany, right? And for more money than people can buy, the stuff they've been buying on the street anyway. So I know that's a lot, but looking at the economics on both sides of this, and I think it's borne out over the last 4 years, legal cannabis is failing in so many ways, in so many parts of the country, because we have the economics wrong. And so what we need to do is allow the producers where they produce, which is here, which, yes, there's Glasshouse exists and some large producers exist, but is overwhelmingly small growers still in the Pacific Northwest, overwhelmingly small farms. If you look at an acre and under, right? To allow those folks to enter into the markets where their cannabis will be priced at a price so that they can make a living. And then we will have an industry that has some accountability. And there's no way that we get to on either side, there's no way that we get to an equitable industry if it's not an industry that's based in small business. And so now I will stop. It's too long answer to your question, but I'm passionate, and that's why I do this.
Awesome.
No, we understand your passion, and that's why I brought you back, because it's a ever evolving situation. And you were just with us a year ago, a little over a year. So I think Al Byrne has our next question for you.
Yeah, Adam, welcome and welcome back.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, we all voted to have you unanimously, so you're in good company here. My question is essentially what you've just sort of alluded to. You were here a year ago, give or take, and what we'd like to know is what happened in that year. Mm-hmm. Was there something positive, negative, neutral? We're hoping it's positive. Can you fill us in?
Yeah, no, I'm actually really excited to fill you in, because it's kind of amazing. So since I've been here, we passed the bill in California. Governor Newsom signed the bill in California, and then we introduced the bill in Washington State, and that bill has been passed and is headed to Governor Inslee's desk. When Governor Inslee signs it, which he is expected to do, that will give us the entire West Coast with interstate commerce laws. And so this is where I'm going to explain something that's important to the next step, and then I'll tell you what our next step is. The Washington law and the about to be law and the Oregon law both require an indication of tolerance from the Department of Justice, right? Both laws say that the state can move forward to regulate interstate commerce when either Congress legalizes, don't hold your breath, or there's an indication of tolerance from the Department of Justice in either a memo or policy statement. The California law does not have that requirement. California can move forward if Congress legalizes, or if the DOJ gives a thumbs up, or if the California Attorney General, Rob Bonta, issues an opinion stating that doing this, that regulating commerce between legal markets, would not put the state in further legal jeopardy. And so on January 31st, Governor Newsom asked asked Attorney General Bonta for that opinion. He not only asked for that opinion, he sent an 8-page legal memo arguing, and it was written by the General Counsel of the Department of Cannabis Control, Matt Lee, arguing that the state in fact could regulate interstate commerce without putting itself in further legal jeopardy. And so that has been sent to Rob Bonta. It was a pretty strong argument. The Governor Newsom made no bones about the fact that he wants the power to move forward. Now, we tend to believe that we're going to need the DOJ to give a thumbs up one way or the other, because it's one thing to say, okay, yeah, we can drive cannabis up and down the West Coast, but that's not helping anybody. We need to get cannabis or at least the industry here needs to get cannabis to legal markets to the east, and more, and at the same time, there are plenty of states, to the east of here that have medical programs, for instance, where patients are stuck in illicit markets because what they have available to them legally is expensive and crappy, right? So we're going to need DOJ to give the thumbs up. So our next move is we are now interfacing with the 3 governors' offices, Oregon, Washington, California, and within the next hopefully 3 weeks, we are going to make a public ask of those 3 offices, of the 3 governors, to reach out to the Department of Justice to ask that in their new guidance, he has promised, Gavin Newsom has promised a new call memo, right? New guidance. Ask that in their new guidance, it take account of the West Coast interstate laws. And also, and this is important, take into account the fact that everything that California is already doing, everything that Oregon is doing and Washington is doing, is already interstate commerce under federal law. The minute it leaves the grower's hand, it is interstate commerce. And the feds can come in and arrest everybody, right? That's why the feds can come in. That's why we only operate, because the DOJ has said we're not going to get in the way. So we're about to ask our governors to go to the DOJ and urge DOJ, because there's guidance coming to in the guidance to be specific that when they say we will leave you alone if you're operating under state regulation, that they actually mean it. Again, that's a too long answer to your question, but I hope it's a good update.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that. Next up is Michael Crowitz.
I'm going to take advantage of the fact of timing here, because I have a follow-up. I just didn't have to put my hand up, but I do have a follow-up on that first. Today on another meeting, heard a conversation that a fellow had with representatives of the Bureau of Cannabis Control out there in California about cannabis seeds. And evidently cannabis seeds are being sold pretty liberally around the country as hemp, because of the way that hemp has been defined under federal law, and because of the way, I guess, the industry or the folks involved have felt comfortable in doing so. Seeds, again, don't have any THC in them if they're very clean. In other words, they don't have any cannabis stuck to the outside of the seed. It isn't particularly easy to prove, that it is hemp or cannabis, for lack of a better word. The California quirk is that you can only sell products commercially in California if you're selling it from one licensed Bureau of Cannabis Control person to another, or entity to another, which precludes them from being able to sell out of state, which I guess is somewhat of a deterrent, from being active in the national market that's going on right now. So I guess as a follow-up question, it's kind of a couple-fold question, really. Do you think that California should fix that problem, if you will, in the law? And more generally, what do you think about seeds and those issues around seeds? Should the market be trying to exploit this loophole, or they should be holding back, waiting for a more open and more honest way to do it? I mean, where are you at on that?
I mean, to say that people should not take advantage of loopholes that exist is sort of an exercise in futility, right? So, but I will say, it sounds like California should fix that, because if you're talking about other seed growers around the country, being able to trade in seeds across state lines in California, those who are licensees being stuck, right, by virtue essentially of their license, of not being able to do that, that seems like that's something that needs to be fixed. The other side of that, and this is not the solution to that, the solution is California needs to fix that specifically. But if California were to open up commerce, interstate commerce, with other states, then legal producers could sell their seeds as part of that, under that regime, right, to other states. That would be within the license regime. So, but again, that's not really the answer to your question, which is California needs to fix that shit.
Well, I appreciate that. Straightforward. So the question that I had was, I guess, inspired to a certain extent. The council has spent a little time with Dr. Brian Adenoff, who's the head of the physicians for cannabis regulation. And I guess he worked, I don't know for how long, with the ASTM entity on standardization, coming up with a label, a proper kind of sign or symbol that could be put on a product, again, to differentiate it between cannabis and hemp, as I was talking about before. The question is, how can we get the different states to standardize their practices via packaging, labeling, because it would be needed to have consistency for interstate commerce that doesn't exist currently. So also the problem is different taxation and not including the federal tax for now. How would that all come into play?
So, so in terms of initially, if we were to open up trade now, the easiest way to open that up without, spending years trying to coordinate regulations is to say, if you are to sell product into New York State, it must meet the New York State, labeling and testing requirements, right? And, having spoken to a bunch of friends, in labs out here, have assured me that, if there's a market to sell into New York State and there's a testing standard to test to, give them a month, they'll be able to test to that standard, right? If there's money in doing that. And so It's very likely that when you're talking about states like California and Oregon, that those states would just stipulate that if you pass testing in Oregon and California, you can sell it in their states, because Oregon and California, almost certainly right now have the most stringent testing standards. Same thing with labeling, right? If it's sold in New York or New Jersey or anywhere else, it needs to meet that labeling standard. And if you're a producer or, and you want to sell into those states, you need to meet that labeling standard. It will incentivize states through organizations like CANRA, right, to start to coordinate more of their regulations. And I think that that's something that the regulators understand and have talked a lot about at CANRA, about getting toward that, because they know eventually it's all going to be one market. And I think that the more, not just testing and labeling standards, but I think that the more we can have the states lay out a regulatory framework between states and have states participate in that and normalize that, that is more likely to be a more workable regulatory framework as a basis for federal regulation than just waiting for the feds to come in slapping down federal regulation, de novo, right? I think once we have commerce between states and we will begin to get, the format. And I just think the states have a lot more experience with and interest in the success of, the industries on the ground than the feds.
All right. Next up will be Council Member Kendra Soul. Council Member. Kendra, you have
bored her to sleep.
You have to unmute. We can't hear you.
God damn it. I was on a roll too.
Hello, Council Member.
Hi, I'm Kendra. So as I was saying alone, this has already kind of been answered by what you've said, but the question is, what is needed to be done about lab testing and federal standards, which between standardizing labels between states and testing standardization, you kind of explained that. I'm specifically in Ohio State. We're only medicinally, we don't have recreational, we're not allowed to grow anything like that. However, I only live 20 minutes away from Michigan. So where do I go? I drive out to Monroe, I go to Michigan, get anything I fucking want, right? The cops in my county know everything, right? Oh, fuck, we're live, right? Anyways, they know. And I'm going against, this is why we're here, is to fight this stuff and try to figure it out. So how do we get the labs in Ohio? How do we, I have people who would like to invest and grow and start dispensaries in Ohio, but they're right here in Michigan. So how do we get those labs and all those standardizations into Ohio and works that framework between the two states?
So, medical states, to me, we're really looking at two different issues, right? If we're looking at the adult use industry and states trying to put an adult use industry together, there are a bunch of competing interests. I would argue that the first and most important interest is still, no matter what, moving as many cannabis consumers as possible into safer, regulated markets, right? I mean, I think that's the idea. Like, we lose it in revenues and this and that, and right. I still think that's first, but in the adult use market, there are other concerns. How do you make sure that it is an industry that is accountable to its history? How do you make sure that the industry is small business focused? How do you make sure that it is as broadly beneficial as possible, provides the best, right? On the medical side, I think the only reasonable policy concern is, how do we get the best selection of the best and most cost competitive medicine into patients' hands as fast as possible? That is the only thing we should worry about. If that meant that Amazon could do that, then that's what we should do in medical. Because it's nice that if medical works out as like a whole bunch of growers get to make money, but the only thing we need to concern ourselves with is, how do we get the best, most cost-efficient medicine into the hands of patients, move them specifically out of untested, unregulated markets immediately, right? So the question in Ohio is Ohio's patients should be able to get from Michigan, but Ohio's patients should also be able to get from California or any other legal place, right? But in a state like Ohio, you have to ask, is there a future in agriculture, right? There very well may be for small craft agriculture, but there probably is not for mass production agriculture. And if I was looking at a business in Ohio, right, I would be very wary, or most places in the country, I would be very wary and understand that that any trying to lure grows into Ohio, they're gonna even if this is not successful, when federal legalization happens, they're immediately going to compete with everything coming from the West Coast. So do people want to invest in that? Is that or should Ohio really be focused on retail, distribution, delivery, product development, small manufacturing, wellness, hospitality, anything that brings the cannabis in and then sets up business from there? And the testing is going to be mostly happen where it's grown. Does that make sense?
Yes. Kendra?
Yeah, just a regulatory, like more of a regulatory, so everybody's on the same page. I mean, that's the whole goal for all of us.
Yeah. How are your regulators there?
I'm not sure yet. I'm pretty new to all of this, specifically Ohio in the system. Like I'm saying, there's a lot of stuff going on right now. So Ohio, that's what I wasn't getting at. Ohio specifically, I'm trying to get so that everybody's on the same page. Like if Michigan's right there and everybody's going to Michigan, like how can Ohio get on the same exact page and get the same regulations?
They need to let the cannabis in from Michigan. That's and so it can be sold.
So everybody's on the same page, right?
Yeah. And that's going to be a state by state decision until federal legalization. And when federal legalization happens, then all states are going to be forced to open there. If you have a medical market, you're going to be forced to open your doors, and that's going to force the standardization.
All right. Next up will be Council Member Wade Laughter.
Hello, Adam, and thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to see you again, Wade.
Right back at you, sir. It's been a while.
Yeah.
Quick observation. You've described very beautifully the logic of the idea of interstate commerce compacts in the cannabis industry and how that could help, particularly here on the West Coast in the newly regulated cannabis industry. My question is really kind of coming from that observation that you had about it being logical, but the fact is it makes a lot of sense on this end of that potential compact. But how do we go about convincing states? I mean, you mentioned Idaho, and I think that's a hopeless cause for the moment,
right.
But I'd really love to hear your thoughts on what does it take to get states to not only accept product from other places, but like you were suggesting, start developing the industries that could be associated with cannabis that come in from other places. Is it a social media thing? Is it a legislative thing? What are your thoughts on that, having worked in a bunch of different plations?
Well,
that's all that.
I think that that part of the industry, those other parts of the industry are being developed in those places, right? And, there's all kinds of people that are waiting to open up dispensaries in Maryland and Virginia, right? There are definitely people who want to make, cookies, right? There are definitely people who want to, do delivery and distribution and all of that stuff. They are now all going to sit on their hands and probably burn a lot of money for several years while they figure out how many, which big companies are going to, build which big grow facilities and how long it takes them to get crops, right? I mean, we're choking off that part of it's not that we have to convince people to open dispensaries. We just need to be able to say, if Maryland can start to, license dispensaries now, we can fill them with world-class product that's competitively priced tomorrow, right? And keep them stocked at forever, right? At prices that are, reasonably competitive with the illicit market because they're being grown, and so, I've spent a lot of time hearing people say, oh, why would New York do this, right? Why would this state do this? And, I grew up in New York City and I was buying weed out of bodegas and mail slots up dark stairways and, in a long time ago, not as long as you maybe, but pretty damn close, it feels like. And we've always had an industry there, a cannabis industry that supported tens of thousands of people. And it's an import industry. None of the growing was done there, right? And it's just, I mean, you can grow avocados in New York if you want. You can build a facility, totally feasible. It's a terrible, terrible business idea, right? And so this is what we are incentivizing right now. We're incentivizing a lot of investment into agriculture in places you would never invest in this kind of agriculture if you were in a market that functioned. And so I don't know that we need to convince anybody. I think in some states we need to disabuse some of the politicians of the notion that agriculture is the industry. Because in most parts of the country, the industry is not agriculture. It's every part of it but the agriculture. And the agriculture in those places is never going to be a viable money-making proposition. And so are they giving up jobs? I guess in the next 2 years, if you talk about a bubble of building facilities and then watching them collapse, jobs, but they're also making everybody else wait when they could be opening thousands of stores. And, so the minute that this begins is the minute 2 or 3 governors start to have this conversation, it starts to become clear we can do this. It's going to get very hard to tell people in New York, oh no, you'll have to wait 3 years for a steady supply of weed grown in a warehouse upstate. The 2 states over, they're buying Emerald Triangle, flower for a third the price, but you can't have that. It's not going to roll for very long. So I hope that answers the question a little bit. Good to see you, Wade.
Thank you, Adam. Right back at you, man. Keep up the good work.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, come back around again because we're rounding through the questions.
Even with how much I'm talking, you're still getting through the questions. That's absolutely amazing. You are an incredible MC.
Well, this is just how it goes. We have an agenda. But one of the things, I grew up in rural Louisiana, and growing up in rural Louisiana, there was a prejudice. They even told me, don't go to California, this, that way, and the other. So there's state prejudices between individual states. So with cannabis, though, we know that it crosses every socioeconomic boundary. It also crosses every state line as well. So do you feel with this legal importation, exportation is getting beyond kind of hypothetical past just the 3 Western states?
Right.
Do you feel that there would be state prejudices towards or against certain states and their cannabis?
That's such a great question because it really takes in the larger context of what's happening right now, right? And how much animosity there is. And I definitely have visions of Alabama, Mississippi, all of the states down there deciding, yeah, they'll do business, they'll buy Oklahoma weed. They'll buy, they won't buy California weed, parts of Texas, I think that's, listen, it's like if you want to it's like I used to see this thing, you don't like Jews. Well, you need to not use any of these things that Jewish people invented, right? Really, you don't like us? That's fine. You can smoke Oklahoma weed. We'll send we'll share our New York and Oregon weed with, our California and Oregon weed with New York. But true to your point, cannabis is really about bringing people together. And so I would hope that opening up access to some of the best cannabis in the world would make people feel more connected to folks that they otherwise don't think, too much about, or, in their worst moments don't think too highly of.
Well, to follow up with that then, and what is the point of leverage to move that conversation in the future? Because, yes, to be flippant and say that is one thing, but we're talking,
Right.
lots of serious economics. And as you're talking, small farms are suffering currently that could become small, medium to large farms if this were to change.
Yep. Well, I think that this is, if and when federal legalization happens, everything opens. Right, at once. What we are trying to do, because it is in nearly 40 years on and off doing this kind of work, waiting for Congress to fix cannabis policy has not yet once been a winning strategy. And so trying to do this, and it has all been pushed forward by the states. And so this is, doing this, opening these doors at the beginning is going to be about state opt-ins. And there are likely states, for reasons well other than Illinois, that likes California just fine. They have their licenses so politically locked down that they keep their doors closed until federal legalization. There are some states that are not going to participate When federal legalization happens, all the legal states will, they will have the best cannabis in the world forced upon them, and they can still choose to buy local. But I like to think that ultimately people will smoke amazing cannabis, and I like to hope that the politics around that will be minimal, but we shall see.
Well, yes, we shall see.
Hope is my drug of choice, Etienne.
Well, if it, can't have anything else but hope sometimes, especially, when, this whole thing started off at a whole bunch of people deciding these laws are dumb. We're gonna risk our freedoms to finally flip this script. And
you can't do that. It's federally illegal.
Absolutely. And, 30 years ago, kids stopped talking legalization. It's not going to happen in your lifetime. So give it up. So to know that we're currently sitting here in 2023 talking interstate commerce potentially shows how far the discussion has come, well beyond that, to the point where this is the over the horizon discussion that needs to meet with reality sooner than later.
Yeah.
So carrying forward, next will be Councilmember Michael Crowitz with our next question.
Sure. So I have a question about, I guess, the future. And the question is, how do states get started in the cannabis industry, those that want to build their industry with others that are already in interstate compacts? And I guess the question is, the further down this road, how do we, what's the narrative? What do we say to states that make them understand what they're getting into? Like you said, the disabusing them of the idea that ag is where all the money is one aspect of it, I suppose. But what else is key there?
I mean, I think the opportunity just needs to be there, really. I mean, I think, I think that this is a way for the states that need commerce and the different ends of the supply chain need it for different reasons, right? We have incredible world-class producers who produce as efficiently as anyone in the world who can't make a living. And then on the other side, we have entire states where, eighths of mid butter, $70, right? And you can buy it outside, for 40. And so there's need to align this. I think that there are quite a number of states that are at the stage of having legalized or just legalizing that have not yet, invested a whole bunch in, statewide production, that need to really think this year about how much they want to incentivize that. Because like I said, maybe it's a 2-year period before legalization happens. Maybe it's 5 years, but you're plowing money into, if you think you can be competitive with California grows, by all means, your state should be on the agricultural side. But if you don't, if you question that, then we need to give them a pathway to open up an industry. And those states that take advantage of it will open up much better industries much faster. They will move far more of their citizens out of unregulated markets years faster. And I think that will become just easily apparent to everybody. And, it builds its own momentum. The current system is just broken for everyone.
No, it is. It very much is. And this is hopefully a solution that will help us arrive there. The last of our formulated questions, now we're going to get to some other questions, is with, you've got states willing to come online and some won't, some will want to maintain their own state protectionism. How do we overcome, or how does someone start to put cracks in that state protectionism so that they could get some considerations and help move the needle a little bit?
Well, I think in the medical states, I think it really is about patients standing up and making the human rights claim, right? You cannot, if I am a legal medical patient in your state, Mr. Governor, right, but I am stuck in buying unregulated, untested products in illicit markets because what's available here is not suitable for my needs or price competitive, you have to tell me why. If the feds are not going to stop us, you have to tell me why I cannot get my medicine, right? I mean, I think that argument has to be made in every medical state by any patient that is looking at, overpriced, under quality, not what they need in the legal market. So that's the medical side. And I think that's important. And whether that may be about patients being able to bring stuff by mail directly, right, from, in a medical state, right? I think that the easier we can get medicine to patients, the better. In adult use state, I think it's a matter of making the pitch to the states that have not yet invested considerably into production, right? To say, let's think about this. We can, the feds aren't going to stop us. We can open up your entire industry this year, or you can invest a lot of money and waste a lot of time in stuff that's not going to be competitive. I think we're going to get some of those states are going to start thinking, oh, we'll give out grow licenses, but we'll also allow product to come in. And that will be a realistic way to open an industry, because people who think they can grow should be able to grow anywhere in the country that they want to do that, right? And so, but we're also going to allow retail and distribution to bring that in. And I think once that happens a couple of places, it just becomes very difficult to tell your citizens, no, you can't have better, cheaper weed, right? And it becomes hard to tell your, everybody but the growers that, no, you have to wait for locally produced weed when, retailers in the next state over can fill their shelves, from 1,000 suppliers, right? So the weight of the broken economics, right? It turns out, cannabis is like, it's just failing in so many ways. The fact that we have legalized cannabis in all these states, and the only places it's not objectively failing, maybe Colorado, but the other only places that it's not objectively failing are places it hasn't had time to fail yet, right? Like, I mean, it's almost got like, and so it turns out that the prohibition laws are easy to get around, but the laws of supply and demand are ironclad. And I think once we start moving cannabis from one state to another, it becomes very difficult to maintain the facade that a siloed market in a Minnesota or in a Maryland or in a, is an efficient market or is going to, and I think that, and again, I don't have to make the argument, because I know that when Congress does get around to legalizing this, if you're afraid of that as a producer somewhere, then maybe you shouldn't be producing, because that's actually the competition ultimately.
Exactly. Council member Alburn has a follow-up for you.
Yes, Adam, thank you. I don't know if this is a critique or not, but I've created a question. The weight of your argument tonight, and there's nobody in America that supports that weight of your argument more than Al Byrne, is that this argument is based on the patient. Good, I hear you, and thank you for doing that. But we've been here a while, and I have really not heard the word plant. I haven't heard anything about interstate commerce of products created by the plant.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't heard anything about food, its nutritional value as a food, as part of the interstate commerce. Well, I will just say, as a personal opinion, I think that people that go into the recreational cannabis business expecting to come out zillionaires have unreasonable expectations.
Agreed.
Okay, so to me, when you start talking about interstate commerce, I've been in business my whole life. I'm talking about stuff. That's where the money is. People buy, build, sell stuff. And that includes food, and that includes products. Where do you put this in your conversation? And does it come up? Or are we still just centering on medical? Thank you. Again, I love it. But it's a broader issue. It's a broader issue. Yeah. Please address that.
Of course. I've talked maybe a lot about medical, and I know that, in this group, that's a primary concern, and patient access, and so forth. But obviously we are the laws that we have passed do not make a distinction. It is about moving cannabis, whether that is medical or adult use. They do not make a distinction between products, any intoxicating cannabis product, right? Anything that the state regulates as cannabis would be eligible under this. from the plant to the products. And so this is very much about both medical and adult use. And I think, but like I said, I split it up because I think that there are different imperatives. If you're talking about a state that's just a medical state, right? I think that getting the plant and getting the products and, getting access for patients becomes the only, to me, becomes the only ethical policy priority, right? Everything else is bullshit. It's about, you have medicine, you have people who need it. Getting the safest, best, cheapest medicine to people is actually our only concern in a medical environment. In the adult use market, that's going to be about consumer demand, right? That's going to be about, and again, from the plant through the products, through the foods, but we are, we've done so much, like watching 20 years in Oregon and California of medical, and what happened and how that entire culture came up from underground and shared information and genetics and knowledge, right? And became this incredible center. We have this incredible center around this plant and everything that we create from it. Like, there's so much talent and so much genetic value and so much, know-how, and we're crushing this, right? We're crushing this, the people who have this, who bring this, right? And who have dedicated their lives to, to the plant and everyone who touches it and everyone who loves it. So it's not just about medical. And I tend to talk on the political side because I'm engaged in a political strategic struggle, and sometimes I neglect to talk about I talk about things indirectly. I talk about an industry that's accountable to the plant and its history and the industry's history, right? Things like that. But in having political conversations, sometimes the important connection to what we're really talking about gets a little lost in the jargon. So I appreciate you bringing that.
All right. Well, next with the follow-up is Michael Krawitz.
Thanks, Etienne. We talked a little bit before about what might be needed at the national level to create a kind of national framework that would meet up with national legalization and industry on non-medical, non-scientific,
right,
what we call recreational cannabis worldwide. But we've really less talked about medical. And it's fascinating to me. I was on a call earlier today, again, talking about history and just, I guess it's tuned my brain into these thoughts. But I'm just wondering kind of how you visualize the future in terms of a couple of questions. One is, like you were saying, disabusing the local folks of thinking that they're going to be doing a lot of agriculture when you can get cannabis from California, right? But that their future of that opens up again, and you start talking about access to cannabis grown nearer to the equator, maybe economy of scale and labor force, costs that make it much more appealing options, and maybe more appealing to the consumer. Like Al was saying, this is about the patient, and some of this is darn good medicine that we just don't have any access to. Might not even, might need to be pulled back from the Wayback Machine to be put into force. And one of the things specifically I was talking about today that I just sort of realized was, back in the day, we had Acapulco Gold, we had Panama Red, we had all these different varieties that were very distinct. They were products that we could buy, that were whole flower products that were very consistent, very, very, very high quality, and came directly, often in a backpack with a hippie carrying it from the source, in India, right, or Central South America, wherever, on the other side of the world, in Cambodia, whatever. And the thing about it is, and this is just little tidbits that I picked up here in the cannabis movement as I've worked along, but that is the most god-awful thing you could ever do, is name something after the place you're in if you want to create trademarks and rights and protect your intellectual property in the future. In other words, they gave this all away to us in a way that is really hard to give back to them who actually originated stuff. And it's created really quite a three-dimensional problem for us. One is, how do we do just that I was saying, give back to those who really, not only do we need to, we owe them a debt for them helping us along, with this cannabis plant, keeping it from being lost to history, but they also right now will benefit us with the great products that they can produce and participate in this product marketplace. So it really does benefit us to try to figure this out. And right now we've got this horrible geopolitical crap going on where countries like Canada and others that are bigger enough to feel comfortable in marketing and medical cannabis do so right now. And the United States, as we talked about before, is being held back from that. And that's a crime in and of itself. But assuming for a moment that disappears and then we're dumped into that international marketplace, like, I don't know, help me visioneer a little bit, not just how it might work, but also how we might fix it.
I get extra for soothsaying and fixing the world, Mike.
I know, man.
I don't
okay.
know, man. Like, I think we need. I mean, okay. As long as I won't be held accountable for actually making this work. Now, I mean, I think. Look, my view is that I am hopeful. I am ever hopeful that we are on the cusp of a revolution in consciousness. I kind of feel like we're trying to get there as a species. I kind of feel like there's a movement toward that. And clearly there's a fascist backlash against that. But I think, I think that the consciousness touching substances that are now becoming, cannabis and psychedelics that are now becoming, central to this movement for cognitive freedom is may help us get to a revolution consciousness where we give a shit enough about the indigenous people that we've ripped off, that we can do some good. And maybe cannabis as an industry, if it isn't taken over by GTI and 6 clones of them, we'll have enough soul to lead a recognition of the history of this plant and who has, where it has come through over the years, and pay some homage to that in real terms, to make some, not to make anybody whole, but to at least, give some, shower some benefit where it is, where it is deserved. I have hope of that, but of course, we could all be living under Nazism in 3 years, it looks like. So who the fuck knows, man?
But also a practical.
Sorry, I'm sorry for that.
Well, a practical side of that question, though, that
bring me back to the practical, because that was useless.
Well, the practical side is, in that future where you do have this sort of other dam break, and you have now a much cheaper and in some cases better quality product. How does it retool? How do we retool?
Right.
What do the states then? What's your best?
I think for states I actually think that the only long-term stability for production in cannabis in the U.S. is going to be higher end, strain specific, right? It's going to be, genetics based. And I think that biomass, flower, even not just biomass, but mass flower, and, is going to be produced in closer to the equator or somewhere, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I just think that's likely the way it is, and the folks who will survive and do well as in agriculture are going to be growing specialized products, not masses of, and that's kind of as it should be. It has always been a specialty. It has always been a specialty crop grown here under prohibition, right? It has always been, not everybody treated it as such, but it is, small batch from a lot of people who cared very much about genetics, what they were selling, what they were giving to their friends, what they were consuming. And that is the value that we will bring, not that we can have acres of cheap land and cheap labor to produce mass products, right? So I think that goes that way, which is yet another reason for, New Jersey not to invest, $1 billion in facilities to grow cannabis for a couple of years, right? But ultimately, even that, I don't think glasshouse is a future. I mean, I've talked to Graham Farrar. He's a nice guy, and what they've done is pretty, I guess, on the business side, impressive. But I don't think there's a future in like mass production here. That may be long enough for them to make a bunch of money, but not for very long. It's going to go elsewhere in the world, and probably, that's how it should be, I guess. But I'm not an expert either in international agriculture. So maybe that's not exactly how it should be. And I'm willing to get in line and fight, to do what we can to make that right. But I don't see long term that most of it is probably going to be grown here for the low end market.
Right.
You think I'm wrong?
No,
I'm sorry.
No. It's again, people are going to want their.
We're way afield of my expertise here. I'm totally speculating. So,
well, that's all this is.
a
certain amount of speculation too. Last question is going to come from Council Member Wade Laughter, who has last follow up.
Oh, thank you. I kind of wanted to go back to the within the United States. And that conversation, the Veterans Action Council, one of our bylines is access for all.
Mhm.
And that's, I think, behind a lot of the questions that we've been asking you, Adam. And I think your point is well made that the need of medical patients, the folks that actually need cannabis, as versus those of us who simply enjoy it and need it. I think that's maybe what was behind some of my questioning is really trying to understand how can we get that opening going where it's not happening yet. And your point is well made. The medical programs exist in most states at this point. I don't remember how many it is, but it's most of them. And from my point of view, medical products not only should be free of tax, and like to your point, reasonably priced and a wide selection of products. Because legalization wouldn't have happened without people who actually needed cannabis. So I guess I'm just calling out gratitude for your point of view there, and recognizing that is in fact the most compelling argument that we have, not just for interstate commerce, but for access. For more of a comment than a question.
That's okay.
Anyway,
I would
thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, all of you. I would point out, because I don't think I mentioned, so I'm sure you're all aware, but there's an amendment to the federal budget that's been in every budget for the last 10 years. It's in this one again. And this year it's called the Blumenauer-McClintock Amendment that forbids DOJ from interfering in state medical programs. If you ask Earl Blumenauer, whose name is on that amendment this year, he will argue very strongly to you that amendment already prevents DOJ from stopping a state from bringing product in from other states to serve their patients and their medical program. Now, getting states to take that step without some other assurance is difficult. But when we are asking the governors to reach out to DOJ, and Merrick Garland came out again on March 1st and said, the new Cole memo, new guidance is coming soon. What soon means for him, who knows, but, hopefully relatively soon. But there's new guidance coming. And when we ask the governors to reach out to DOJ to say, hey, when you issue that guidance, please take this into account. We also are going to ask them to ask DOJ, and also separately, what about between medical states because of this amendment? And DOJ could very simply clarify and say, well, whatever we think about adult use in medical, we are barred from stopping you. And that would immediately open up every patient in the country's rights to access the medicine that they need in other free states. And there may be some fights with their states, but honestly, once that happens, it's going to become very difficult to tell patients, no, you can't get free, better medicine available legally in this country, even though you're a legal patient in a free country. You start to really pile on, and so I am very confident that Biden and Garland mean what they say when they have said over and over again, we want the states to make these decisions. We don't want to get in the way of the states. And so I'm very confident that they're not going to argue and fight over cannabis with a bunch of Democratic governors going into the 2024 election. It boggles the mind to think they'd be that politically dumb, especially when they keep saying, we want the states to do it. We're going to let the states do it. But on the medical side, I am virtually certain that there is no reason for Merrick Garland to look at this and not say, hey, we're barred from interfering in state medical programs. If Delaware thinks they need to bring cannabis in because they're never going to have the kind of grow program that needs to serve their patients, then we can't stop them. And I think that's going to happen. So, we've been working 4 years. I will wrap up by saying this. We passed the Oregon law in 2019. We were ready in 2020 with a bill in California working with the rural counties, RCRC, the Rural Counties Association. And that bill was going to go in 2020, but a couple of things happened, mostly COVID, and it didn't get introduced. And then 2020, 2021, I kept up a conversation with Nicole Elliott's office. Everyone knows Nicole, and kept telling her, Governor Newsom should step out on this, Governor Newsom. And she kept saying, well, get some legislation. And I said, I'm just some kid with my laptop on my deck in Oregon. I can't introduce legislation. RCRC has the legislation 2020, 2021. The industry was in a disaster. The COVID, finally in 22, that got introduced. And I really believe without COVID, we would have been here a few years ago. It all makes so much sense. Oregon did it. California would have done it. Washington, the minute California passed their bill, it was a guarantee Washington was going to pass their bill. There's no way they were going to get left behind the other two states, right? So this was all, and so it would have been nice to be able to ask Merrick Garland this 2 years ago. But I think we are going to get the governors. I think that my sense is that the governors will work with us and make this ask. We're not asking them to promise anything. We're not asking the governors to do anything. We have these laws. We can't do anything till DOJ says something. Can we ask and find out? They're about to give guidance. And I am feeling incredibly hopeful that at the very, very least, they are not going to say, oh no, still we're going to stand in the way of medical patients. So I have been in a great mood the last few weeks. I am excited about what the next few months is going to bring. And I think we will have a lot more answers on this by the summer, midsummer.
Well, needless to say, a lot has happened in the last year and a lot still to happen on this issue. But Adam, thank you very much for taking the last hour or so to help give us a better lay of the understanding of the land. And
what other groups would let me sit and babble on here like this? Like, you guys are great. I really appreciate it.
Well, we care. We do.
I know. That's why it's great.
Well, I'd like to thank council members Michael Krowitz, Al Byrne, Kendra Soul, Brian Buckley, Wade Laughter, myself, Etienne Fontan, and of course our wonderful guest Adam Smith. And Adam, definitely come back and tell us how things are going. Keep us in the loop, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
100%. Be well, everyone. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend, and I look forward to being back here soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. This has been V.A.C's Roundtable number 53, Interstate Commerce with Adam Smith. We'll be back at the end of the month with May 26th, where we will have Peter Grinspoon joining us. So thank you, everybody, for joining us, and have a great rest of your weekend.
The Veterans Action Council is a Pace Radio Network content provider. You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The opinions of the individuals during this broadcast are their own, and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not